Imagine millions of courageous conservatives all across America rising up together to say in unison, we demand our liberty.
And from Liberty University, that was Senator Ted Cruz. Welcome in for Hour 3 of America's Forum with Miranda Con JD Hayworth. And Miranda, that is the big news.
That is the big news. Just a few moments ago, we heard him announce his presidential aspirations at Liberty University in Virginia.
So what about this? Ted Cruz, a young senator, can he make it all the way to the White House? Let's talk about it. From Newsmax New York with more on the story, our contributor John Fund. And here on the anchor desk, we're very pleased to have Raul Mas with us. John, first to you, your take on the speech from Ted Cruz at Liberty University.
Well, Ted Cruz is certainly going to set down his marker as the conservative firebrand, the one who's going to fire up the crowds. Ted is an accomplished speaker. He won the National Extemporaneous Speech Award when he was a teenager. So he knows how to fire up a crowd. And that, combined with his grassroots Tea Party backing, will certainly put him in contention. I think he announced today, in part, because he wants to raise money from the grassroots to have a good showing for the March 31st financial statement that the Federal Election Commission will be publishing. So this is his rallying point to get the grassroots excited, get them ginned up, and give him a head start on some of the other candidates. That's why he went first.
Raul, your reaction?
Listen, I think a fantastic speech on the part of Ted Cruz. This is a gentleman who absolutely believes in his convictions, apart from the fact that he's a terrific speaker and was able to sort of fire up the crowd by sort of touching on all the hot button conservative issues. He is a man of conviction. He's a man of enormous passion. I've had the pleasure of meeting him personally, and he says what he means and means what he says. And I think he'll do exceptionally well, much more so than people give him credit for. As you saw right there, he's a terrific speaker, enormous amount of energy, blessed with a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful girls. He's going to look good on the campaign trail, and I think he did it exactly for what our previous guest was saying. He needs to get in early, he needs to bring his ratings up, he needs to get himself known to the American people, and by getting a head start, he's doing exactly that.
John Fund, he spoke of courageous conservatives, and we should also note there was not a teleprompter in sight, alluding to his great ability to speak extemporaneously. But mindful of that, has he elbowed in on the social conservative faction that in previous campaigns have been with Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum? Is that the base he really seeks to launch his path toward the nomination?
Well, Senator Cruz has told me that he views himself as a full spectrum conservative. He views the conservative movement as a stool with 3 legs. There's economic conservatives, there's national security conservatives, and there's social conservatives. And he says none of the other candidates really address all 3 of those stools and leave a solid foundation for a conservative candidate. He plans to be strongest on every single one of those 3 stool legs. And I don't think he's appealing to any one group over another. He's simply saying, I'm the complete package, vote for me.
But will he swing any of those undecided voters to him?
That's a big question for him. I mean, I think he's got an enormous amount of support within the Republican Party, within the conservative base. I think he's going to have a tough time going after some of the more moderate wings of the Republican Party, and believe it or not, there are some moderate Republicans in the party. And I think if and when he does secure the nomination, it's going to be an uphill struggle for him on the national stage. But it doesn't matter at this point. I mean, at this point, it's getting his name out, it's establishing his credentials as a viable candidate, it's getting the public to understand who he is, what he stands for. I think that's important. I mean, we're going to have a big battle in the Republican Party. I think it's a battle worth having. We've got some terrific candidates, and I think the debates and discussions are going to be very good for this country.
Raul, let me ask you, about a minute remains. Ethnicity. Hispanic,
Yeah.
You've got Cruz and Rubio.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, first of all, I'm extremely proud of the fact that these are both Cuban Americans like myself, okay? Cuban Americans, we have a disproportionate representation in the halls of Congress. So we've got 2 Republican Cuban Americans that are running, both of them very conservative individuals. Later this week, you're going to see the third Cuban-American, in the case of Bob Menendez, a Democrat who has spoken out against Barack Obama, probably get indicted by Eric Holder. You're seeing two different sides
Dare
of the
we
coin
say
here.
a partisan contrast
That's right,
there.
a very partisan contrast. But I think they're both exceptionally qualified individuals, and I look forward to hearing what they each have to say.
And we will look forward to hearing more from you, Raul Mas, and also from you, John Fund at Newsmax New York. What you need to do as you're watching this is to stay tuned. There's more straight ahead on this Monday on America's Forum from Newsmax TV.
We have not yet reached the finish line, but make no mistake, we have the opportunity to try to get this right. It's a matter of political will and tough decision making. It's a matter of choices, and we must all choose wisely in the days ahead.
Secretary of State John Kerry discussing those ongoing nuclear talks with Iran as we continue here on America's Forum, alongside Miranda Con JD Hayworth, and also with us on the anchor desk, community activist Raul Mas. And we should also point out that from Newsmax New York, we have our good friend and Newsmax contributor, John Fund. Now, Raul, we hear the Secretary of State talk about wise choices. And we understand Iran has chosen to try and forge relationships, some might say a base of influence, in Central America. Your take on Iran and that kind of expansion.
This is sort of a little side element that's been going on for quite some time and has been of enormous concern to the U.S. military intelligence apparatus, including the folks down at the U.S. Southern Command. Iran has, over the past, I'd say, 20 years or so, established quite a base of operations in Latin America. There's a very tight nexus between, for example, Venezuela's government and Iran. There's apparently been all sorts of passports that have been issued to members of Hezbollah by the Venezuelan government. And perhaps the scariest thing of all is back in 1994, there was a bombing of an Israeli Jewish center in Buenos Aires. Killed almost 100 people, injured hundreds more. It was a Hezbollah truck bomb, basically, a fuel air explosive that destroyed that building. And that was basically carried out by the cultural attaché of the Argentine embassy, who was in fact a terrorist, still alive, still in Tehran. And quite coincidentally, last January, the prosecutor who keeps bringing up the fact that Iran's fingerprints are all over this bombing in Buenos Aires died mysteriously of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Buenos Aires. There's all sorts of shenanigans going on in Latin America. You don't have to hear it from me. The House Foreign Affairs Committee last week had extensive hearings on it. And that's one reason that I mentioned last week when I was on your program, the fact that we absolutely need to secure that southern border. I mean, there are certain things going on south of the border, aside from the mass migration of economic refugees. You have a capacity for people to come across that border that basically are looking to cause harm to the United States, many of whom have close ties to Hezbollah and obviously to their patron state, which is Iran.
John, you just heard Raul say this has been going on for quite some time, but we don't hear about it very often.
You don't.
Why do you think that is?
Well, Iran, which is a pariah state actively supporting terrorism around the world, doesn't exactly advertise its activities. They try to keep it low-key. So they infiltrate these countries, they buy influence, they pass money under the table. And whether it's Ecuador or Bolivia or Argentina or Venezuela, they have bought access to the corridors of power. Now, I don't think it's often gone to the extent of these Latin American governments giving active aid to terrorist organizations, with the possible exception of Venezuela. But it's of great concern to us because we all know that one of the easiest ways that terrorists can slip into this country is through our southern border. And it's always of concern that Iran, should it not get its way in the nuclear exchange talks, may become even more aggressive and belligerent towards the West and actively step up its terrorist operations against other countries.
Raul, we have heard from Iranian cabinet officials that if the United States or Israel takes action against Iran's facilities, that Iran is prepared to strike back. Do you believe personally that Iran may have cells here in the United States already?
Look, I have little doubt that they do not have those cells. I mean, I think that in fact there probably are agents of Iran already operating within the United States. For sure, they're operating in Latin America with the support of many Latin American countries, either officially or unofficially or surreptitiously. There's now something like 80 quote-unquote cultural centers in Latin America. The Shiite population in Latin America is not that large. So ask yourself, why does the government of Iran see the need to have so many quote-unquote cultural centers in the continent of Latin America? This is a troubling situation for the United States. I don't think they would be foolish enough, or I hope they would not be foolish enough to attack us as a consequence of perhaps failed negotiations with this nuclear arms deal. But I get very concerned when I hear guys like, the former CIA,
Woolsey,
talking about the fact that, if Iran has the capability of getting a nuclear weapon and basically, giving it to terrorists who could set off a dirty bomb within our borders, or could basically shut off with an electromagnetic pulse most of our infrastructure. That's a scary thing.
It's a sobering thing, and it's something we're going to continue to talk about. Our discussion will continue right after this timeout. Stay tuned. Welcome back to America's Forum with Miranda Con JD Hayworth here. Let's continue our conversation. We went to break on a rather sobering note about just what's going on in Central America, and particularly Venezuela and its relationship with the nation of Iran. That's why we're so pleased to continue on the anchor desk with community activist Raul Mas of South Florida, and from Newsmax New York, our contributor John Fund. Raul, during the break we were talking about international travel. Yep. Airliner in particular that had some interesting stops over the past few years.
There were, for quite a number of years, flights going from Venezuela, stopping in Damascus, in Syria, and then stopping also in Tehran. And that was an Airbus A340 that was making that flight, I think, at least 2 or 3 times a month. And you have to ask yourself what was going out on that flight and what was coming back on that flight. And according to some of the testimony that the House Foreign Affairs Committee heard last week, that what was going out on that flight was basically cocaine that was basically dropped off for Hezbollah in Damascus to in turn infiltrate the cocaine into Europe and generate funds for the organization. And that on the way back from Tehran, it was basically bringing operatives of the Quds Force and Iranian agents back into Venezuela, where they would receive Venezuelan passports in order to expand their intelligence network within Latin America under the shield of a Venezuelan passport.
Some have suggested that there's an alliance that's being formed between Russia, Venezuela, Iran.
Sure. I mean, they all have basically, shared interests.
Are they working together, though?
I think they are. I mean, I think in the case of Venezuela, I mean, the fact that Chavez, back when he was alive, received Ahmadinejad in Caracas and, made a big spectacle of his alliance with Iran. I think, the Russians have also, their ships have made ports of call at Venezuela, although I view them, quite frankly, as less of a risk in this hemisphere. I'm more concerned with sort of the surreptitious activities of Iran in Latin America and how they may impact the U.S. in terms of penetration through our southern border.
John Fund, as we take a look at this curious relationship and convenient relationship and troubling relationship, what do you think is Iran's next move in Central America or quite possibly within the borders of the United States?
Well, remember, if we end up with no nuclear agreement with Tehran, Tehran will not be the only people upset. They're going to be very much anxious about their future because of the extra sanctions that might be added if Iran does not agree to a substantive nuclear deal. Those sanctions could include continued lower price of oil, which the Saudis are cooperating with on, restrictions perhaps on the refinery capacity that Iran can get in other countries so it can buy gasoline for its vehicles. It doesn't have any refinery capacity to speak of its own. And if that happened, the Iranians would of course lash out. How would they lash out? Well, probably the Middle East, but potentially also using this network of operatives that Raul described in Latin America. Perhaps ostensibly, they could be using operatives that they would smuggle into the United States to create mayhem. They certainly have a lot of options because they've been seeding this ground for a long time.
Raul Mas, we thank you for raising the alarm and coming in to talk to us today about this. It's been something that has been in the news, but a lot of folks haven't paid attention.
Pay attention to it. It's been on the sidebars, but it's stuff that's going on. It's important to know what's happening south of the border.
And we are very grateful for your insights. It's something we'll continue to follow. We'll have you back again real soon to talk about that. To John Fund, back at Newsmax, New York, we want to go back to the announcement from Ted Cruz. While it's true that Senator Cruz used the poll-tested phrase, secure the border, John, you've been around the intricacies of politics, the nuts and bolts of funding. Was there a disadvantage for Senator Cruz to announce right now, or is there an upside to it?
Oh, I think the upside is he gets attention. He's obviously been a little bit off the radar screen since the government shutdown, which he helped lead in September 2013. Other candidates have eclipsed him in media coverage. This puts him right back into the mix. It energizes the grassroots, encourages them to start supporting him. And he obviously picked a place where he knew there would be an extremely enthusiastic audience that could be summoned at short notice, Liberty University. So it was a perfectly pitched campaign event with great visuals.
John, we're reporting on our website that history hasn't generally been kind to the first out crowd. Will being first work against him?
Oh, you know, I think that that's more the coincidence and luck of the draw than anything else. I can remember candidates who announced first, like George W. Bush in 2000, who went on to sweep his party's nomination and take office as president. So I think that that's largely a coincidence and an irrelevant factor.
And John, in terms of the business of politics, in terms of fundraising, now that he is officially announced, what does that mean in terms of reporting financial data and all those important things?
Well, he skipped the exploratory committee that most candidates go through. He can move now to raising hard dollars. There's a limit of, I think, $2,700 or so that people can contribute to his presidential campaign. He can start taking that in immediately. Any money that's contributed before March 31st is posted for the first quarter of 2015. That information comes out in April, and he wants to show something that indicates he can compete with not so much at the Jeb Bush level, perhaps, but certainly enough that he can be within hailing distance of people like Scott Walker or Marco Rubio, who have access to more substantive donors, more big dollar donors. He wants to show, gets enough grassroots support so that he can post some real money numbers and convince people that he's going to be a serious candidate with serious budgets for advertising and outreach.
John, I have to ask you really quickly, about 30 seconds. Do you think that the fact that he was born in Canada, his dad was born in Cuba, do you think that will work for him or against him?
Look, it's an irrelevant issue. John McCain was attacked in 2008 because he was born in the Panama Canal Zone. The courts have ruled over and over again, if you're born in a foreign country and one of your parents is an American citizen and you have resided for a certain number of years in the United States, you are eligible to become president. That is settled court doctrine. There's a Congressional Research Service report to that effect. It's a dead issue.
More on that later. Right now, a national weather update with Jessica Reyes.
Hello, I'm Jessica Reyes, and here's your weather from coast to coast to kick off your Monday. States such as Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and the state of Washington dealing with rain for today. Meanwhile, by the Four Corners for today, daytime highs reaching the lower 80s and staying dry to kick off your Monday. Not so much by the Great Lakes. We're dealing with snow for your Monday and some cold conditions, so bundle up as you head out. By the Gulf of Mexico for today, nice and warm with temperatures reaching the lower 70s. A bit cooler as you step out this morning and take the kiddos out. And then by the southeastern portion of the country, showers and thunderstorms, so keep those umbrellas around. The Sunshine State not living up to its name. By the northeastern portion of the country, a high pressure is pushing through, but the temperatures continue cold with mainly sunny skies in the state of New York. Meanwhile, here are some of your daytime highs for your Monday.
And our got that nice little tickle the keys, yes. And
Nice
to
little
Jessica
jingle.
Reyes, we thank you for that update on weather. And of course, the weather was just fine indoors for Ted Cruz at Liberty University. Big crowd there, although the springtime conditions still await. There are other things we have to talk about from Washington. For example, waste, fraud, and abuse with Medicare. What does Congress need to do in terms of oversight? We'll talk about that with Matt Shuck coming up.